In the summer of 1994, the calm rhythm of a small Ohio town was shattered by a mystery that still lingers in the memories of its residents. On an ordinary afternoon, a grandfather and his 6-year-old granddaughter vanished from their own backyard while tossing around a frisbee. The strange part was that the backyard gate was still locked, and there were no footprints, no broken branches, no trail of any kind to explain where they had gone. For years, the case remained unsolved. Then, 15 years later, a new family moved into that very home. When they finally decided to open the long-ignored shed out back, they made a chilling discovery. On a dust-covered table lay a tiny pair of shoes, a set of glasses, and a red frisbee neatly placed side by side. And hidden beneath the dirt floor of that shed was something far darker, forcing the community to face a truth more horrifying than they had ever imagined. The version of events recorded in old police files, newspaper clippings, and missing person flyers painted a simpler picture. Officials believed the pair must have wandered off into the woods behind the house. Maybe Raymond, the grandfather, felt lightheaded. Maybe little Emily chased after the frisbee farther than she should have. Perhaps both of them became disoriented among the trees and simply never returned. That was the story the sheriff had told the reporters back when the case was still fresh and the public wanted answers. There was no sign of a fight, no broken locks, no evidence of foul play. Just two people who seemed to have disappeared into thin air. The woods behind the Bailey home, however, were hardly the kind of wilderness someone could get lost in. It was nothing more than a thin line of pine trees that quickly ended at an old, sagging barbed wire fence. Beyond that stretched wide, empty farmland as far as the eye could see. Standing on the Bailey's porch, you could see nearly all of it. That was the part of the story no one could ever make sense of. If they had gone into those trees, where could they possibly have ended up? The Bailey family themselves were well liked and trusted. They kept to themselves, but they never hesitated to lend a hand when neighbors needed one. Raymond Bailey had been part of the town his entire life. He had spent 4 decades working at the sawmill and was known as a man who valued hard work and quiet living. After her marriage ended, his daughter Bate returned home with her young daughter, Emily. She wanted Emily to grow up with a safe yard to play in and a grandfather who cherished her. For 6 months, that small household lived in peace, filled with routine and simple joys. On June 4, 1994, the three of them shared a light lunch outside: grilled cheese sandwiches, apple slices, and glasses of lemonade on the steps. Emily was especially attached to her red frisbee, the one with the black scuff mark from when Raymond had thrown it against the mailbox by mistake a week earlier. That afternoon, Bate watched through the kitchen window as her father and daughter played in the sun. Just after 2 o'clock, she stepped away for only a few minutes to switch the laundry. When she came back, the yard was silent. Her father and Emily were nowhere in sight. The frisbee had disappeared as well. Bate rushed barefoot into the grass, calling their names again and again until her voice gave out. By evening, the driveway was filled with flashing blue lights from the sheriff's truck. Deputies and volunteers fanned out through the trees carrying flashlights, stepping heavily through tall grass and weeds. Nothing turned up. There were no scraps of clothing, no tiny shoe, and not even Raymond's glasses, an item he needed desperately to see. The next morning, the front page of the local paper carried a heartbreaking image: Bates sitting on the porch swing, clutching Emily's favorite stuffed rabbit to her chest. The caption beneath read, "Family holds hope." But within days, that fragile hope gave way to whispers and speculation. Some pointed fingers at Raymond's longtime neighbor, Old Man Carter, who had argued with him for years over a property fence. Others murmured about Bates' ex-husband, who had skipped town just before Emily's birthday, leaving behind debts and a bad reputation. Detectives knocked on doors, search dogs scoured the woods, and news vans briefly swarmed the neighborhood. Yet nothing concrete ever surfaced. By September, the The brightly colored missing posters taped to telephone poles had faded, rain reducing them to tattered scraps. But Bate never gave up. Every Saturday, she walked along the fence line behind her house, pushing through thorns and waist-high grass, searching for any sign. Some nights, she chose to sleep out on the porch with the light left on, hoping it would act as a beacon in case her father and daughter somehow found their way back. She printed new reward signs, handed out flyers at local shops, and clung to any glimmer of a lead. And every year when June 4th came around, Bates stood silently at the edge of her yard, staring into the empty space where she had last seen them, as if this might finally be the day they would emerge from the trees. 15 years rolled by. The house had changed hands twice during that time. After 2001, Bate couldn't bring herself to stay there anymore. She once said the yard felt less like grass and more like a grave she had to trim each week. She left, moved out of state, and started over with a new marriage somewhere farther north, where strangers at the grocery store didn't recognize her face or pity her with hushed looks. The last man to live there before the bank claimed it back was a solitary fellow named Dwight Furlong. He rarely spoke to the neighbors, allowed the yard to become overgrown, and kept the old shed locked up with a rusted padlock. When asked, he explained it was full of junk he'd clear out someday, but he never got around to it. In the spring of 2009, the property was sold off at auction. A young couple bought it without even visiting in person, tempted by the wide yard, the low cost, and the promise of a sturdy home. On the very first day they arrived, they stumbled upon the shed, almost swallowed by vines and piles of dead leaves. The lock was so corroded, they smashed it open with a hammer. Inside, only a thin streak of light reached the back wall. Heavy cobwebs clung like fabric. Scattered around were busted garden tools, rusty oil cans, and a rotted lawn chair. In the corner, on top of a worn wooden table, sat a tiny pair of blue children's sneakers with rainbow-colored laces. Next to them rested thick, brown-rimmed glasses, lenses dirty but still intact. And right in the center lay the red Frisbee, marked by the same black scrape from when it had once slammed into the mailbox. One of them edged closer, their flashlight trembling. That's when they spotted it. The floor beneath the table wasn't flat. A slight mound of dirt pushed upward, no wider than 2 feet, as though the ground had been disturbed not long before. It looked just the right size to conceal something someone never wanted discovered. The couple wasted no time. They phoned the sheriff's office before even stepping back outside. Within the hour, 2 patrol cars pulled up. One of the deputies who came was no stranger, Mike Henley, now older but once the rookie who had searched that yard 15 years earlier. When his eyes fell on the Frisbee, his stomach churned in a way it hadn't for years. He nudged the mound gently with his boot and thought of that summer day in '94, the bright sky, the endless fence line, and Bates' desperate voice echoing through the trees. He immediately called for backup. Meanwhile, the young couple stood hand in hand by the mailbox, gripping so tightly their fingers turned pale. From where they stood, they could glimpse the backyard through the weeds, the very patch of grass where the old man and his granddaughter had simply vanished. Now, deep inside that shed, under a heap of soil, the past seemed ready to rise again. By the time the sun began to sink, yellow tape had been strung across the yard, fluttering from fence posts like makeshift flags. Sheriff's trucks lined the dirt road outside the Bailey place, their tires sinking into the soggy spring ground. As night fell, whispers spread through town something had been found, or was about to be. Inside the shed, Deputy Henley stayed close to the mound but didn't touch it again. He had been only 23 when the 2 went missing. Back then, he wore a crisp new badge, a neat haircut, and boots so shiny they squeaked when he walked up Bate Bailey's porch steps. Now nearly 40, he carried the same badge but with years of quiet grief weighing heavy on him each anniversary. He still remembered spotting a single child's footprint near the fence all those years ago, a tiny print facing the house, not away from it. He had pointed it out to the lead detective, who dismissed it with a shrug. "Kids run around in circles," the detective said. "Doesn't mean anything." But to Mike, it had always meant something. He'd never forgotten it. To him, it felt like Emily had been heading home. The forensic crew arrived around 9. They set up glaring work lamps that turned the shed into a stage. The cobwebs hung like curtains, the shadows hiding secrets ready to be uncovered. They carefully photographed the shoes, the glasses, and the frisbee from every possible angle before sealing each one inside evidence bags, fragile envelopes now carrying 15 years of silence. As the digging began, Mike stepped out. He couldn't bring himself to watch. He stood by the mailbox instead, watching red and blue lights flicker against the old swing set. His mind wandered back to when his own kid once swung there, when the Baileys still hosted cookouts, and when Bates still smiled. 1 hour bled into 2. Finally, Travers, the lead forensic investigator, a large man breathing heavily, emerged from the shed. His gloves were dark at the fingertips. He approached Mike quietly, speaking low so the couple wouldn't hear. "Henley," he said, "you should probably come take a look." Mike rubbed his palms against his uniform, leaving faint streaks across the fabric. His boots pressed into the damp grass as he crossed the yard, the same yard where Bate had stood every June 4, praying for answers. The shed door creaked open. Inside, a single bulb swung on a nail, glowing like a nervous pulse. The mound was gone now. In its place, they had uncovered a shallow pit, maybe 2 feet deep. Resting neatly inside was an old wooden box, no bigger than a small cooler. It looked handmade, with splintered wood, rusty hinges, and a dull latch. No markings, no writing, just aged wood holding its secrets tight. Travers hoisted it out carefully, laying it on a plastic sheet beside the table. One of the younger techs tried to open the latch, but it wouldn't give. A crowbar forced it open with a painful squeal of metal. But inside there were no bones, no human remains. Instead, the box was filled with papers, delicate yellowed sheets stacked one over another. Some bore handwriting, others had been typed long ago on a typewriter. Lying on top was a black-and-white photograph, its edges curled with time. Mike leaned closer, narrowing his eyes. The picture showed the Bailey backyard, this exact yard, long ago. There was Raymond, easily recognizable in his suspenders and work shirt, kneeling on the grass. Emily was at his side, laughing, a frisbee in her hand. But at the far edge of the photo, half cut off, stood a man Mike didn't recognize. Nobody had ever mentioned another figure being there that day. With gloved fingers, Mike turned the photograph over. On the back, in tidy block letters, someone had written June 4th, 1:50 p.m. A chill spread across his skin. The reports he remembered said the last confirmed sighting had been at 2:10, when a neighbor saw them in the yard. But if this photograph was real, someone had been present 20 minutes earlier, someone close enough to take the picture. Meanwhile, Travers was carefully documenting and bagging every fragile page like treasure. Mike sifted through the stack, mindful not to smudge the faded ink. Some were receipts from a hardware store, a lumberyard, and even a pawn ticket for a hunting rifle. Others were scraps of notes in Raymond Bailey's strong block handwriting. Phrases like "call Carter about boundary line and don't tell Bate. Too dangerous." Then halfway through, Mike froze. On a single page, the ink was worn but the words still unmistakable. "If you find this, I didn't want this for Emily. I tried. God help me, I tried." Mike shut the lid of the box, his fingers trembling with unease. From the shed doorway, the young couple peered in, whispering nervously, their faces pale with worry. A gust of wind swept across the unkempt yard, stirring the same tall grass that Grandpa and Emily had once walked through so many years earlier. His eyes shifted to the frisbee. now tucked inside a sealed evidence bag. The scuffed mark along its surface caught the glare of the work lights, a curved strip of missing paint that looked like it had been waiting for someone to notice all this time. If you ever find this, the thought pressed against his mind as Mike stepped out into the open air, the photo still haunting his thoughts. He needed to track down Bate Bailey. She might be the only one who could recognize that blurred figure and explain why Raymond Bailey had feared someone would come after his granddaughter. He didn't catch the look on the young husband's face as he stared past him toward the half-dug hole. "Deputy," the man said with a shaky voice, "shouldn't that be deeper?" Turning back, Mike noticed the ground didn't look quite right. The soil was uneven, and a darker seam of dirt cut under where the first box had rested, almost as if something else had been buried alongside it. The floodlights buzzed faintly overhead while the shed door creaked wider on rusted hinges. For an instant, Mike thought he heard his own name whispered in the breeze, soft, like a child's breath slipping between the trees. Narrowing his eyes, he studied the ground. "Bring the shovels," he ordered. "We're not finished." The second dig proved harder than the first. Midnight came and went before they had scraped away enough to make progress. The lamps flickered occasionally, drawing moths that beat themselves against the hot bulbs until the fragile wings burned. The couple stayed bundled together on the back steps, wrapped in a blanket from their car. They barely spoke, though the woman startled every time a shovel struck something buried below. Mike lingered close to the rim of the pit, his boots sinking slightly into damp earth. His pulse hammered in his throat, the same sick, dragging sensation he'd carried years ago when he was 23, standing on this very lawn, desperate for even the smallest clue like a shoe sticking from a bush. That might prove the child hadn't vanished into nothing. Then a shovel struck wood. The sound was hollow, deeper than before, pulling silence over the group like a heavy cloth. Travers crouched down, brushing away dirt with the care of a surgeon. Slowly, a rough wooden crate came into view. The boards were cut unevenly, their edges stained dark. No hinges this time, no lock, just nails bent crudely as if someone had slammed it shut in haste. A deputy leaned close with a flashlight, whispering under his breath. Mike caught the faint words, "God, I hope not." Travers wedged a crowbar under the lid. The wood groaned as it split, releasing a stale draft of sour air. Mike turned his face aside against the heavy stench of decay, 15 years of silence trapped inside old timber and damp soil. As the lid cracked open, everyone leaned in, bracing themselves to see bones or tattered clothes. The evidence proving Raymond and Emily Bailey had never left the yard alive. But the sight inside wasn't what any of them expected. Resting inside was yet another container, this time a dented green metal trunk, the kind of footlocker soldiers once carried. Beside it, wrapped in rotted fabric, was a bundle of children's drawings, stick figures and crude shapes, the sort of art taped proudly to a refrigerator. Mike lifted one gently and held it under the lamp. A red circle, a stick figure girl. Behind her, a heavy block shape scribbled so violently with crayon the paper tore. At the bottom, Emily's name was written in uneven block letters. Setting it aside, he laid a hand on the metal trunk. It was cool to the touch, heavier than it appeared. The latch popped open with a metallic snap. Travers leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowed. Inside lay a revolver, its barrel corroded with rust. An oily rag was wrapped around the grip. Beneath it sat a folded newspaper, yellowed and crumbling at the corners. Mike carefully unfolded it. The headline, dated 1993, read "Local Farmer Missing After Boundary Dispute." The photograph showed an older man with a sun-scorched face and a narrowed gaze. The name Carter. Old Man Carter. Memory surged back. The town gossip from 15 years ago. Carter and Raymond had fought over their shared boundary for years. Some called Carter a mean drunk, ready to swing a shovel if crossed. Others whispered he had gone broke and blamed Raymond for stealing work or water. When Carter vanished, no one looked too hard. People said he was just a drifter with no kin to claim him. But the gun was the real question. Mike turned it over, careful of the grime. Raymond Bailey had never owned a gun, never allowed one near Emily. So why was this here? His gaze drifted back to Emily's drawing. That dark shape behind the stick figure didn't quite resemble the shed. The angles leaned wrong. It looked closer to a truck, maybe a trailer. A hand on his shoulder startled him. Travers jerked his head toward the porch where the couple waited. "They're asking about family, about the girl's mother. Think she'll come down here." Mike exhaled, his breath clouding in the chilly night. Bait. He hadn't spoken to her in over 10 years. Rumor said she had taken another name, moved far north, and left this land behind as if it had never existed. He doubted she even knew it had been sold. He scrolled through his phone. Her number was still tucked away in an old contact list. His thumb hovered over the call button until movement caught his eye. By the swing set beyond the cracked fence posts, a slim figure shifted between the trees. Mike blinked, certain the floodlights were tricking him. But the silhouette remained, a young girl, hair drifting over a pale dress, barefoot in the wet grass. She stopped near the swing, tilting her head as if watching him. His throat tightened. He wanted to call out, but no sound came. The wind rattled the branches and the figure flickered, there then gone. Mike stared down at the drawing again, Emily holding a small round shape, the same frisbee now sealed inside the sheriff's cruiser. He slipped his phone back into his pocket. Contacting Bate would have to wait. Something in the present was stirring, and he knew if he didn't follow it now, the trail would vanish. He moved toward the fence line, unaware of the porch light dimming behind him or the faint metallic click of Travers closing the trunk. Inside, a single bullet shifted with a cold clink. Mike didn't rest that night. Once the shed was sealed, the yard became a pool of harsh light and dew. Deputies shuffled back and forth, carrying evidence bags, boxes of soil, and the footlocker secured inside a chain of custody crate. The young homeowners waited silently in their truck, staring at the house they had not yet made a home. Mike sat on the back steps, boots planted where Bate once stood with her coffee, gazing at that same stretch of fence every morning, willing her father and daughter to return. The sky paled slowly, black turning purple, then gray. Every time Mike closed his eyes, the vision of the girl by the swing haunted him, head tilted like Emily in old photographs, puzzling over something no one else could see. A quiet knock broke the spell. Torres, a rookie deputy, poked his head around. "Deputy Henley," he said. "There's a woman here. She says her name's Bate." Mike's chest tightened sharply. He stood so fast his boots scraped the concrete. Behind him, the swing set groaned in the wind. Inside, the Bailey house smelled of stale air and bare wood. The living room was nearly empty save for an extension cord coiled on the floor and a folding chair dragged in from the garage. Bate Bailey stood by the window in a faded denim jacket, her hands buried in her pockets. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray, but her eyes carried the same tired sharpness as before. "Bate," Mike said hoarsely. She turned, her mouth twitching between a smile and tears. "Mike Henley, you've aged." He gave a faint laugh. "You look good," he said, though the words weren't fully true. Her face stayed serious as she stepped closer. "Tell me straight, the shed, the frisbee, is it them?" Mike rubbed his neck. "It's theirs, no doubt about it." He hesitated, then added, "We uncovered more too, papers, a gun, something connecting to Carter." Her eyes snapped at the name. "Carter, Old man Carter, he's gone. He disappeared before they did. We think there's a link. Raymond, your dad. He left receipts, notes, looked like some sort of plan. Plan, she cut in. He nodded. Yeah, maybe. She dropped into the folding chair, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, staring at the scratched floor. He told me they'd only be out an hour. Lunch, then the yard. I asked him to keep her close. He swore he wouldn't let her out of his sight. Her laugh was low, bitter, without humor. I should have known better. Mike eased himself onto an overturned milk crate. Bait, there's more. A picture. A man in the yard with them. Do you recognize him? She looked up sharply. What man? Mike pulled the envelope from his jacket. He had taken it before the sheriff's office locked everything away. Sliding the photo across the table, he watched her face as she studied it. Her eyes moved over Raymond, over Emily's half-smile, to the faded fence. Then they landed on the shadowed figure. Her fingers clenched until the paper bent. I don't know the man, she whispered, but I know that coat. Mike leaned forward. Whose coat? Her voice wavered. It was my ex's, Emily's father, Stephen. Mike felt the world tilt. You're certain? I am, she said firmly. He wore that surplus army jacket every day, thought it made him tough. He left town a week before it happened. Mike's mind spun. Custody battles, debts, the whispers that Stephen had threatened Raymond. Bates' eyes burned with tears. I told the sheriff. I told them he'd do something reckless. They brushed it off, said he'd vanished. And now this. She slammed the photo down, sending it fluttering to the floor. Mike retrieved it, the jacket's outline clear as day. He slid it back into the sleeve, his thoughts racing. If Stephen was in that yard the day Raymond and Emily vanished, then everything they believed about that summer was wrong. Bate wiped her face, voice breaking. He's alive, Mike, I know it, he's out there. He did this. Mike wanted to argue but couldn't. Bate had never been wrong about her family. A knock broke the tension. Torres stood in the doorway, hat in his hands. Deputy, the lab called. They matched the gun. Mike rose. To who? Torres shifted uneasily, glancing at Bate. Registered to Stephen Miller. Bought in '92. Pawned in '93. Bate let out a sound between sob and laugh, raw with 15 years of buried fury. Mike's phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number, area code 3 states away. He answered. Deputy Henley. A man's voice rasped through the line, faint and distorted. You shouldn't have opened the shed. The call cut out. Mike stood frozen, the dead tone echoing in his ear. Whoever had left those secrets buried wasn't gone, and he was still watching. The dial tone buzzed in Mike's ear like a sharp, vibrating nail. He slowly put the phone down, his thumb pausing over the redial button, but there was no one to call back. There had been no number, only dead air and a threat that now hung in the cold front room, feeling too chilly for a June morning. Bate was already standing before he could say a word. Who was that? She asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. Mike shook his head. They didn't give a name, just a voice telling us we never should have opened the shed. He pushed the next words out, each one tasting bitter. It was a man. Sounded older, rough. It might have been him. Bate wrapped her arms around herself, squeezing her elbows as if she were holding herself in one piece. Do you think it was Stephen? Mike didn't answer. He didn't need to. The question was already everywhere, seeping through the house's thin walls, sinking into the floorboards, the porch swing, and the grass behind the shed where the ground still dipped like a painful memory. Outside, the sun was rising behind a blanket of gray clouds. The yard seemed smaller than before, closed in by yellow tape and officers wearing plastic gloves and carrying clipboards. In the distance, the swing set moved softly on its own, squeaking in the wind. Torres cleared his throat from the doorway. Deputy, the sheriff is on his way. He wants you back at the station once you're done here. Mike nodded, though his thoughts were already somewhere else. Make sure the shed is secure. No one goes near it without me. He turned back to Bate. Let's go, we're taking a drive. She didn't argue. She just picked up her old canvas bag from the floor, its strap worn at the end, and followed him out. They drove north on the old county road, passing the empty feed store, the rusted water tower, and the Baptist church where Bates' mother had been buried a year before Raymond and Emily went missing. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the tires on the road and the soft rattle of the glove box whenever they hit a bump. Bate finally broke the silence as they passed the turnoff to the old Carter place, now just a drooping mailbox half covered in vines. Do you really believe he killed my dad? Mike kept his eyes on the road. I don't know for sure, maybe not with his own hands, but if that was Stephen on the phone, if he's the one who buried that gun, then he was here that day. He knew about the shed. Bate looked out her window, her reflection faint in the glass. He wanted Emily. That summer, he told me he would take her away if I didn't give up the custody fight. He said my dad was turning her against him. He said he'd do what he had to do. Mike's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. Do what he had to do. Around here, words like that could mean anything, where fences didn't always keep trouble out and a man's pride could eat him alive. He turned off the main road onto a narrow gravel path leading to the old Carter property. The place had been falling apart since Carter vanished. The barn had collapsed, the house had been stripped of anything valuable, but the land remained, a stubborn patch of thorns and weeds that refused to let go of the secrets buried there. They stopped near the gate. Mike turned off the engine, and the quiet that followed felt like someone holding their breath. Bate got out first, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. She pushed the old gate open with her shoulder, and the hinges groaned loudly across the empty fields. The house was just a skeleton now, a sagging porch, window frames like empty eyes staring back. Somewhere inside, a bird rustled in the rafters. "Why are we here?" Bate asked, her voice softer now. "What are we looking for?" Mike held up the stick figure drawing they had found in the crate under the shed. He pointed to the large, dark shape behind the little girl. "This shape. It's not the shed. It's bigger. I think she drew a trailer or a truck, something that could be moved." Bate frowned. "My dad never owned a truck." "Stephen did," Mike said quietly. "An old camper. He used to park it out here when the two of you were fighting, right?" Bate nodded slowly. He called it his escape hatch. She said the last two words as if they left a bad taste in her mouth. They stepped over the broken doorway into the house. The floor bent under their boots, the wood cracked and twisted from years of rain leaking through the roof. In what was once the kitchen, light streamed through gaps in the boards, shining on old beer cans, yellowed newspapers, and a broken folding chair half buried in mouse droppings. But it was the back door that made Mike stop cold. It was nailed shut from the inside, splinters sticking out like old stitches. A rusty padlock hung uselessly from one hinge. And just to the right, partly hidden by peeling floral wallpaper, a message was scratched into the wood in rough block letters. "I tried." Bate gently touched the words. "That's my dad's writing," she whispered. Mike felt his breath catch. "I tried." The same words from the note in the box under the shed. The same plea that had lasted 15 years through decay and silence. Bate stepped back, her eyes wide. Why would he write this here? What was he trying to say? Mike crouched by the door, running his flashlight along the boards. The beam caught on something stuck between the baseboards, a scrap of stiff, muddy cloth. He pulled it free. Wrapped inside was a single brass key, dull and worn with age. 3 letters were faintly etched into its head: CSA. Bate leaned closer. "What is that?" Mike turned the key over in his palm. Carter Storage and Auto. It was Carter's side business. Old self-storage units behind the feed store. They've been locked up for years since he disappeared. He put the key in his pocket, his mind already racing. "Your dad didn't run, Bate. He hid something. something he didn't want Stephen to find. She closed her eyes. Emily. Mike nodded, feeling the shape of an answer pressing at the back of his mind like a cold hand. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the gravel road, leaving a trail of dust in the sunlight. Mike watched it disappear behind overgrown bushes, wondering if Stephen Miller was driving, watching the gate, the yard, the old secrets fighting their way out of dirt that was never deep enough to keep the truth buried. He tapped the key against his palm, the metal clicking like a heartbeat. "Next stop," he said, "the storage unit." The storage facility behind Carter's old feed store hadn't had a customer in almost 20 years. The sign still said Carter Storage, an auto in peeling red paint, the phone number missing its last digit like an unanswered question. A rusty chain-link fence wrapped around the lot like a bad memory, patched in places with bent wire and scraps of metal. Old no trespassing signs curled at the edges. Mike turned off the engine just outside the gate. Morning light broke through the clouds, streaking the cracked asphalt with pale light that made the place seem even more abandoned than it did in the dark. Bates sat stiffly in the passenger seat, clutching the old key so tightly her knuckles were white. She hadn't spoken since they left the Carter house, just stared out the window with the name Emily on her lips like a prayer she was too tired to finish. Mike reached over and gently took the key from her hand. "Stay here," he said. She turned to him, her eyes tired but determined. "No chance." He almost smiled but didn't. Instead, he pocketed the key, pushed the door open, and stepped out into the cool morning. Gravel crunched under his boots as he pushed through the gate. The latch opened with a hollow clang that echoed across the lot. Rows of metal doors stretched out ahead of them, 30 or so, each painted the same faded blue. Most were rusted shut, weeds growing through cracks in the pavement. A few still had old padlocks, their orange tags fluttering in the breeze. They found Unit 12 halfway down the second row. Its door was scratched and blistered from years of sun and rain. A chain was looped through the latch, a heavy padlock hanging against the metal like an iron heart. Mike took out the brass key. It slid into the lock perfectly, as if someone had paused the world 15 years ago, waiting for him to find it. Bates stood behind him, arms crossed so tightly her shoulders shook. "Do it," she said. The padlock clicked open with a dull snap that sounded too loud in the quiet yard. Mike pulled the chain free, coiling it slowly in his hands. He placed his palm flat against the cold metal door and lifted it inch by inch. The rollers screeched in protest, then stuck halfway up, leaving just enough space for them to duck under. Inside, the air was stale and sour with the smell of old oil and mildew. The only light came from a crack in the back wall, a thin blade cutting through dust particles drifting like snow. Against the far wall sat an old camper, its green and white stripes barely visible under years of dirt. Bates stepped past Mike, her breath catching. "That's his," she whispered. "Stephen's camper. He used to park it behind my dad's garage. He said it was his getaway plan." Mike kept his hand near his holster. He moved closer, his boots crunching over dead leaves blown in under the door. The camper door was closed, its small window coated with a layer of grime that made it impossible to see through. He reached for the handle and found it unlocked. The door swung open on squealing hinges that made Bates flinch. Stale air drifted out, carrying the scent of old coffee, mold, and something sweeter underneath that made Mike's stomach turn. Inside was a small table, 2 cracked vinyl seats, and a mattress in the back bunk stripped bare except for a thin blue blanket crumpled at the foot as if someone had left in a hurry. On the table sat a shoe box, its corners stained dark. Mike lifted the lid. Inside were Polaroids, yellowed letters, and a worn leather wallet. He flipped through the photos, each one a glimpse into a past he wished he could close. Emily at 4 years old, missing 2 front teeth, smiling at a county fair. Grandpa Raymond at the local diner, caught mid-laugh by a hidden camera. And one Polaroid that made Mike's hand tremble. Emily sitting in the camper's doorway, knees pulled to her chest, staring at someone just out of the frame. Her eyes looked wrong, too wide, too empty for a 6-year-old. She held a stuffed rabbit in her lap. Bates' breath caught beside him when she saw it. Where was she? Where did he take her? Mike's mouth felt dry. I don't know, but this, he tapped the photo, was no accident. He kept her here at least for a while. He turned the Polaroid over. Written on the back in black marker were the words 4 days. Bate pressed a hand to her mouth. Her knees weakened and she grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. He kept her alive, she whispered. 4 days after he took her. Mike's eyes scanned the camper, the corners, the floor, every shadowed seam that might hide what the light couldn't reach. Then he saw a loose floor panel under the table, its edge lifted just enough to catch a boot. He crouched down and pried it free. Underneath was a metal box, painted the same faded color as the camper's trim. He forced it open with his pocket knife. Inside was a roll of faded 8mm film, the kind no one uses anymore. A single note was taped to it, written in the same block letters that had haunted this entire case. This proves it. Mike held it up to the sliver of light from the cracked wall. Your dad hid this. He wanted someone to find it. Bates' eyes met his, empty and burning all at once. Then why didn't the sheriff look for it back then? Why did they tell me to stop? Mike didn't answer, because he knew the question was too big for either of them now. Too big for the storage unit, too big for the old shed. It was a question buried under layers of silence, fear, and the town's stubborn refusal to believe that bad things could happen to a family like the Baileys. He slipped the film into an evidence bag, sealing the past inside plastic, as if that could keep it from spilling out again. Bate turned away, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Outside, the wind rattled the chain-link fence. Somewhere beyond it, a car engine rumbled, slow and patient, just out of sight. Mike ducked back out through the storage door, squinting into the brightening day. On the far side of the lot, a dark sedan idled behind the fence. Its windows were tinted black, the shape behind the wheel a shadow that didn't move. Bates stepped up beside him, her voice low and tight. Is that him? Mike didn't answer. He just reached for his badge, his phone, his service weapon, anything that might keep the ghosts from the shed from climbing out into the light for good. The sedan's engine growled once, like a predator clearing its throat. Then it rolled backward, tires crunching slowly over broken asphalt, disappearing behind a row of dead bushes that swallowed it whole. Mike let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked at Bate, at the Polaroid shaking in her hand, and knew the next truth was waiting on that old strip of film, ready to show them just how far a father might go to hide what he had done. Mike hardly slept the following night. He stayed at his kitchen table, turning the old 8mm film canister over and over in his hands. Outside, the town was slowly waking up at dawn. A single truck drove down Main Street, power lines hummed, and a dog barked in the distance, a sound that felt like it came straight from 1994. Bate was asleep on his couch, wrapped in an old blanket that carried the smell of old coffee and the cedar from the gun safe nearby. She had turned down the idea of a hotel, saying firmly that she wasn't going to leave his side. On the table lay the evidence bag containing the Polaroids, the drawing, and the key that had opened a door no one had thought to check 15 years ago. Next to it was Mike's phone, the screen showing a blurry still image from the beginning of the digitized film. He had found an old projector in the police evidence room, but the bulb was broken. Tors, who was sharp and eager to help, had the film converted at a friend's shop. Now Mike stared at the first frozen image, a section of woods. The camera swung and showed the outline of a camper door. Then there was a quick glimpse of Emily, small and still alive. She was wrapped in a blanket that was too big for her, holding a stuffed rabbit against her chest. One of the rabbit's ears was torn, and there was a dark mark near her cheek, dirt or something worse. He pressed play. The footage jumped and shook in faded color. The camera moved unsteadily as the person holding it walked closer to the camper. Inside, Emily's eyes followed the lens. She didn't speak or cry, she just watched. A muffled voice said something too quiet to understand. Then the camera turned to the shed behind the camper. The door was open. Grandpa Raymond stood inside, half in shadow, pointing at something just out of view. His mouth moved, but there was no sound. A breeze pushed the door wider, revealing words carved deep into the wooden wall, "Help her." Mike paused the video. He moved forward frame by frame. Emily appeared again, this time sitting on the steps of the camper, eating from a small paper bag. The same army surplus coat was draped over her shoulders like a blanket. A man's arm in the coat sleeve nudged her to stay where she was. It had to be Stephen, the same coat Bates said she would recognize anywhere. The same man who had disappeared just days before the missing posters went up and the news crews left when the story grew cold. Mike's breath caught in his throat. Grandpa hadn't wandered off and gotten lost. He had followed his granddaughter. He had found her, hidden her, and tried to keep her safe. And someone, Stephen, had been there too, recording them like they were prizes. A floorboard creaked behind him. Bates stood there, her hair messy, eyes puffy from a night without real rest. At first, she didn't speak. She just stared at the laptop screen frozen on Emily's expressionless face. Mike turned the screen so she could see better and pressed play. The last few seconds of film flickered in poor light. Grandpa Raymond stepped forward, blocking the camera. He pushed the lens away, his mouth moving, his eyes wide and fearful. His empty, shaking hands gripped the frame. Then the film cut to black. Bate brought her fingers to her mouth. Her voice was broken when she spoke. She said he was trying to protect her. All these years she had blamed him for losing Emily, but he never lost her. He hid her. Mike let the silence hang in the room. Wind rattled the window screens. The town was waking up outside, but in that kitchen, time felt still. Bate reached out and touched the evidence bag with the Polaroids. She said he didn't bury her. He buried the truth. He wanted someone to find it when it was safe. Mike's phone buzzed. It was Tor's again. He put it on speaker and told him to talk. Tor sounded out of breath. He said Mike had asked him to check Stephen Miller's last known details. They had looked through his old bank records, which were mostly dead ends, but then he found someone using Stephen's social security number had rented a trailer near Dry Creek just last month, under the same fake name he used in 1994. Bates' eyes shot toward Mike's. Dry Creek was 2 counties north, a remote area with woods, old mining cabins, and hunters who preferred to stay out of sight. Torres continued, saying he had the address and asking if Mike wanted it. Mike's heart pounded. He told him to text it immediately and not to tell the sheriff yet. This was to stay between them for now. Bate whispered that they should go tonight. Mike's jaw tightened. He said they weren't waiting, they were going now. He ended the call, grabbed his badge and gun, and stood up. The laptop screen still glowed behind him, frozen on Grandpa's desperate, pleading eyes. Help her. Those words now echoed in Mike's mind, louder than the wind, louder than the questions that had haunted him for 15 years. He opened the front door. Dawn light spread over the town in soft streaks, touching the edge of the yard where a little girl had once stood, throwing a red frisbee to the only man who had ever promised to keep her safe. Bates' hand brushed his arm, and she said in a low, firm voice that they were going to finish this. Mike nodded. The final clues were out there, waiting where the trees kept secrets and old trucks sat rusting behind locked sheds. Somewhere near Dry Creek, Stephen Miller was still moving pieces on a board he thought he controlled. But this time, Mike was coming to turn that board over for good. They reached Dry Creek a little after 10 in the morning. But in this place, time didn't seem to move in hours. It drifted in sunlight cutting through pine needles, in the quiet wind over an old logging road, in the sound of gravel underfoot that seemed too loud when you didn't want to be heard. Mike turned off the engine a quarter mile from the turnoff. The truck rolled to a stop under low-hanging branches. Beside him, Bates stared ahead, her eyes dry now, as if she had run out of tears hours earlier. She wore the same denim jacket, sleeves rolled tightly as if she had tied herself together so nothing would break loose until this was over. Through the trees they could see the outline of the trailer. Its white siding had faded to gray, with rust streaks where rain had eaten at it for years. A single propane tank leaned against cinder blocks, partly sunk into the ground. Smoke rose from a small stovepipe. Someone was home. Mike checked his gun and made sure his badge was visible on his belt. He hadn't told the local sheriff he was here on purpose. There were too many people who might look the other way if someone like Stephen Miller, a local ghost, came back. Bate touched his elbow and said she was going in too. Mike held her gaze and told her to stay behind him, not to speak first and not to run. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her hand dropped and her shoulders straightened. She had waited 15 years for this front door, this patch of land that held the last clue to Emily's story. They stepped onto the logging road, their boots slipping on pine needles and broken beer cans. Every step sounded too loud in the quiet. Mike's pulse beat hard against the badge on his shirt, the same badge he wore when he had told Bate they found nothing back in 1994. Not this time. They crossed the clearing slowly and steadily. Mike's hand rested near his holster. He knocked once. The door shook on its hinges as if it hadn't been opened in years, but a shuffling sound inside said otherwise. There was silence. Then the doorknob turned. The door opened a few inches. A face peered out, thin, wild hair, a week's worth of stubble on pale skin. It was Stephen Miller, or what was left of him. He looked at Mike, then at Bate. His mouth twitched into something like a smile, but it cracked halfway, leaving just a crooked line under eyes that couldn't look away. "Bate," he said hoarsely, "you look good." Bate didn't flinch. "Where is she?" Stephen's laugh was dry and empty. "She's gone, Bate, always was." Mike stepped forward, his boots at the doorstep. "Where, Grandpa Raymond?" he asked calmly. Stephen's eyes shifted. "Dead men don't talk, deputy." Mike's hand moved to his holster. "We have the film, Stephen. The shed, the drawings, your coat and the photo, the storage unit. This ends here." For a moment, Stephen's smirk faded into a tremble at the corner of his mouth. He looked older and smaller than Mike remembered, as if the years had drained him, leaving only a hollow shell that knew how to be afraid. Bate took a step forward, the floor creaking under her boot. "You stole her," she said, her voice low and steady. "You took her from my father, from me." Stephen's eyes darted toward the woods behind them like an animal looking for a way out. "I didn't take her. She was mine. You were going to ruin her. Raymond was going to ruin her. He couldn't protect her from what comes next." Mike's voice was cold. "What did you do?" Stephen's eyes locked on Bates. "She's not where you think she is. She's not under that shed. She's not in any grave they'll ever find. Your father knew. He tried. God knows he tried. But you can't bury what you owe, Bate. Some things just keep breathing." He stepped back. The door opened wider, and Mike could see inside the trailer a dirty cot, a beat-up cooler, and pinned to the wall under yellowed tape and old news clippings. A single red frisbee, just like the one from the shed, or maybe another one. Mike's breath caught. Bates' knees weakened, but her voice held strong. "Where is she, Stephen?" Stephen leaned against the doorframe as if he were tired. "Where she always was, where he left her, where I buried the rest so you'd come looking." Mike's hand was on his gun now, partly raised. But Stephen just smiled, a small broken grin that seemed to break through all the lies at once. "You dig enough holes," Stephen whispered. "Sometimes you forget which ones are empty." There was a sudden movement. Stephen's hand dipped behind the door. Mike moved quickly, shoving his shoulder forward, gun raised, grabbing Stephen's wrist as a small revolver fell to the floor with a soft thud. Bate pushed past them. A raw, wild sound broke from her throat as she grabbed Stephen's collar. Years of silence and rage poured out. "Where is she?" Stephen's eyes rolled, his mouth working but no words coming out. He choked, his rough fingers clawing at her hands until Mike pulled her away. He cuffed Stephen's wrists behind his back, the cold metal clicks echoing in the quiet pine air. Outside, Mike led him into the clearing. Sunlight broke through the branches, shining on the old camper, the broken trailer step, and the dry dirt that had hidden secrets no one was meant to find. Bates stood behind them, her shoulders shaking. Her eyes met Mike's, not asking for answers, just preparing for the one she knew would never be clear. Mike leaned close, his voice low in Stephen's ear. "Tell her now." Stephen stared past him, his eyes glazed, fixed on the trees, the sky, the wind whispering through the needles. He coughed, a wet rattling sound in his throat. "Dig," he rasped. "Same place he tried, by the swing, by the fence." He laughed then, a dry, broken sound that caught in his throat and faded away. An hour later, they found the spot in the old yard behind the Bailey place, near the swing set where Grandpa used to push Emily while Bate watched from the kitchen window, seeing her daughter fly through the summer evening. They dug where the fence line sagged, where the grass grew wild over roots digging deep into the dark. Mike's shovel hit something solid, then soft, then nothing but cold air and a hole deeper than they expected. Inside were pieces of fabric, a single child's shoe with rainbow laces, and beside it, wrapped in a small child's blanket, was the stuffed rabbit, its ear torn, a smudge on its side. There were no bones, no body, just a hole that seemed to whisper that some ghosts never leave because they were never truly buried, only hidden among the roots of the places they loved. When they shone the flashlight down, the soil caught the light like a door opening slightly. Bates stood above the hole, her knees in the dirt, her fingers gently touching the rabbit's ear as if trying to memorize it all over again. Mike didn't speak. He watched her, watched the swing creak in the wind, watched the fence line shift under the trees that had never told the truth. He knew they would file the paperwork, process the scene, and write reports that said what people wanted to hear: no remains, case unresolved, still cold. But under the dirt, in the quiet of the yard that Grandpa Raymond once watched over with his tired hands, the truth remained alive. Just out of reach, where the frisbee had once flown and the girl had once laughed. In the rustle of the trees above, Mike could almost hear her, small feet running across the grass, the sound of a plastic disc in the air, a reminder that what was lost could be found, but only if you were willing to dig deeper than you ever thought you could.